Oh yeah.
There's this general thought of we must, protect and continue to upgrade and enhance the more affluent areas. But the reality is that these tax dollars are being driven from underserved, lower income communities. So there should be an equity lens applied to how funds are reinvested in infrastructure, which also relates to the environmental justice component. So what happened in Flint, Michigan? Environmental injustice. What we've seen happen to communities across the nation, environmental injustice, when infrastructure breaks down, that ultimately has a very tangible health impact and also an environmental impact, which also secondarily impacts the economy. So then this is like this self-fulfilling cycle of degradation. So data is the only way to democratize the distribution of resources, and technology should be the standard in 2023 and beyond of how communities across the nation are not only administering taxpayer dollars, but doing so in a transparent manner. And then also really identifying that their investment decisions are designed to build equity. If they are not, then we're continuing the structural degradation of our community.
Local Matters family, today we have a wonderful treat, and that is a former mayor from all the way in California. So she's on the left coast, as they like to call it, and we are so pleased that she has chosen to be on Local Matters to talk about some things that have happened at the federal level that are very significant to us at the local level. How are you doing today, Miss Asia Brown?
I'm doing well, Miss Jackson. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for wanting to be a part of Local Matters. One of our traditions is that if you come on once, you're part of the family. So now you are part of the Local Matters podcast family.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Uh, Tell us a little bit about your government career.
Absolutely. I started out in government in 2003. I spent almost 20 years working in local communities in the Los Angeles County region of California. I worked in the areas of economic development, of redevelopment, leading program administration from a variety of capital improvement projects, as well as brownfield redevelopment, and then also focusing on just community development at large. After 12 years, I ran for mayor of Compton, California, in which I served 2 terms or 8 years. And in that time, was able to lead a lot of transformative change for Compton. We really centered on a 12-point vision for Compton plan that really outlined community economic development strategies that also was data anchored and driven. And so we were able to generate record levels of employment, new levels of redevelopment and reinvestment into the Compton community. We were able to drive down crime and a host of other just key quality of life indicators. And then post public life, I rested a year, had my second daughter, and then shifted into the technology sector, still focusing on driving change for the public sector. I joined Forward Platform, which is a GovTech organization that focuses on partnering with governments and organizations to deliver resources and funding to their communities using human-centered technology and custom solutions. And so I head up the strategic partner wing, and I focus on solution design, new markets, and also really crafting effective communication strategies to connect with government and share the power of how we can help them power their missions.
Was being mayor what you thought it was going to be? And as you look back on your term as mayor, are there things that you wish you had done that you didn't quite get to?
Um, I think I had a good idea of what being a mayor would be, as I had worked really closely with various mayoral administrations. But I think what was interesting to me was really the gap in like actual like purview or authority versus what the standard understanding of the masses was. And so there's a necessity to operate regardless of what, your authority or direct authority of power. You have to use influence, influence is leadership. So having to navigate those realities, and then there being like really present forces that capitalize on the community at large not understanding how things really work, was something that was enlightening to me, because I came into it thinking that there's a general desire to move forward, but everyone that's in position is not dedicated to transformation or change. So that was something that
No, you didn't say that.
again, everyone is not dedicated to change or transformation. There are many people that hold public office that want things to stay exactly the same. And it's just, a power grab for them. So navigating, those folks in real places and high places, was a challenge. But ultimately, when I think back, what I wish I would have done more of is taking time, to use different situations as like learning opportunities for the community at large. I tend to really focus on, moving the vision forward and not addressing like negativity, but I do think in some elements, like there are real learning opportunities that can help broaden and enlighten the community to be more mobilized. So I do think that there were some opportunities to do that more than I did.
I always like to ask former elected officials, in hindsight, what you would have done differently. So thank you so much. So you basically took the skill set that you accumulated in the first part of your career and have transferred that into the second part of the career.
Absolutely. And so I'm able to work with communities across the nation, and helping them power solutions to help impact change in their communities.
Excellent. So, having said that, I like to help people focus on a few things. One, the commonalities between governments. I mean, local government's pretty much local government. If you're in California or Texas or Minnesota or Georgia or North Carolina, you're providing the same basic set of services. There are some variations here and there depending on what responsibilities a state government may take on, but a lot of it is very similar. And the other thing that is really important is that all of these levels of government have to kind of work together. And what you're going to bring for us today is an example of the federal government having done something that stands to have a very positive impact at the local level, and that is the Inflation Reduction Act. We hear about the IRA, all these terms and things. And I really would appreciate you just defining for us what that Inflation Reduction Act is and what it means to those of us who are either local government professionals or even those who are just a resident that's interested in what government makes available.
Absolutely. Thank you. The Inflation Reduction Act is a once in a generation opportunity for cities to really make a real difference in the fight against climate change and focus on creating a more sustainable and equitable future for their residents. So Congress obviously passed this landmark package. It's geared to address climate change, but there is a very strong component that's focused on economic development, job creation. There's also an element of clean energy production. So how can we utilize the workforce in our communities to position the United States to be self-reliant in terms of clean energy generation? So that means more green jobs at the local level. There's also a significant investment on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which historically and empirically really impact communities of color historically. So there is an acknowledgement of this element in the IRA, which is called Justice 40, and I can talk about that in just a moment. But the focus area is reducing those greenhouse emissions, but also just improving air quality for areas in communities across the US that have systemically been impacted by of negative economic and environmental implications. And so there are elements that are automatically appropriated to state and local governments, but then there's also a very significant portion that is competitive. And so those competitive funding programs are focused on, again, renewable energy, also building more resilient infrastructure, creating green jobs, and then also expanding access to affordable housing.
Okay. And thank you for tying affordable housing into that. I went to a session, I think, as we chatted before we got started with this recording. I mentioned that I was in Austin, Texas, a
Mhm.
couple of weeks ago for the International City County Managers Association conference. And it's a great conference. And, it's the reason that professionals go to conferences because you got to stay on top of what's happening because things change so rapidly. I mean, if you go back to the beginning of my career in local government, which was X number of years ago, we didn't talk about environmental stuff very often. It wasn't a thing. But of course, as the knowledge base has increased, it has become apparent that it's something that everybody at state, federal, and local government levels need to be aware of and interested in. And one of the sessions that I attended was really connecting environmental issues with health equity issues, with affordable housing issues. And it talked about just what you alluded to about people of color, older people. Basically, if you're not sick from what's built around you, the air quality related to what's built around you, you may be sick because of the air quality in your house.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's dedicated funding for in the IRA. 40% is for disadvantaged communities that have disproportionately impacted by environmental contaminants, not only externally, but there's even elements on the consumer level to improve just air quality within individuals' homes. So there are resources coming to our communities.
Okay. And let's talk about the air quality in the home. I've heard some conversation about gas ranges
Mhm.
and the pollutants that may be emitted from those. Is that part of the Inflation Reduction Act, or is that a whole separate discussion at the federal level?
That is something that is not specifically identified, like line item in the Inflation Reduction Act, but there is a policy within the IRA that really incentivizes states to identify modifications to policies relative to green energy or even consumer products. So, for instance, I live in California. California has identified the phasing out of gas ranges by 2030. So, IRA funding could be utilized to help offset the cost of that transition on the consumer level. There is discretionary funding that can help eliminate or reduce the economic impacts of making these green changes to individual people, and especially focused on like underserved or even those that are historically lower income. So there are mechanisms within the IRA that could be deployed at the state or local level to offset these changes within their homes.
Okay. And that hurts my heart because I absolutely love my gas range.
So I've had to make a personal transition to induction, and there is a difference, but that's where we're going.
Yes, because I live in an older home and that gas, it just cooks so well. I just love it. But I guess my question is, should they be replaced, or is there a way to make it safer, make a gas range safer? Has there been research on that? And is that part of the Inflation Reduction Act?
Relative to research, I'm not apprised of that element for IRA, but I do know that there is funding set aside to invest in renewable energy and just energy efficiency within our communities, and that could be a variety of maybe also transitioning, to other modes of cooking, but then also there could be just upgrading older gas ranges to more safe appliances as well. So it really depends on the state's policies that are
Okay.
being set, but there is funding set aside to help facilitate that transition and move toward a greater green energy footprint for the U.S.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And when we say green energy, tell me, what does that really mean?
So green energy is really there are many definitions, but generally that have a net zero impact to the environment. When we think about those that are considered non-green jobs, there's generally tied to like the fossil fuel industries or very specific, like petroleum and other really historic and traditional forms of energy production. So anything that improves the carbon footprint, anything that reduces the reliance on those specific fossil fuel industries could be considered a green job.
Okay. All right, great. And the climate change, we'll talk some about climate change too, because that's another what was a buzzword a few years ago. I think now more and more people are kind of understanding that it's a real thing, based upon just weather patterns. You know, every summer it seems to get hotter, and the heat lasts for longer. So I think people are kind of getting it there. But how does this Inflation Reduction Act relate to climate change as well? What is the idea behind the funding that would be available?
So relative to climate change, there are programs specifically just interwoven into various aspects of IRA policy, but specifically there is a carve out for climate change. So there's like an environmental justice thriving communities grant program that focuses on, again, really democratizing air quality and reducing the contaminants that are found, especially in underserved communities. There's also the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that really focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions throughout local communities as well. There's also the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program that is focused on investing in technologies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also other harmful air pollutants. There's also very specific indicators that are tracked via the air quality management districts for various states and regions. And so there are a whole host of indicators that they are tracking. And so within all of those indicators, there are opportunities to craft programs that help reduce the long-term impact or outcomes within those specific areas. But I want to just highlight too that there is a national clean investment fund, and then there's also a water infrastructure finance and innovation act. So there are various opportunities, and also specifically there's the general and low income assistance competition. So there is funding set aside that is really supporting projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So what that looks like in a community, it could be adding additional bike paths, or could be trying to maybe support affordable housing in close proximity to transit so that the last mile could be eliminated. There could be, there's a whole host of programs that local communities can apply for these various sources of funding that ultimately help improve the climate in the long term. And then relative to the water infrastructure finance, there's another specific support opportunity for communities to help really add resilience to their water systems, thinking about just the continued obsolescence of American infrastructure as a whole. There is the opportunity to layer Inflation Reduction Act funds and Build Back Better funds. So what I personally see the IRA is it's a great amplifier and catalyst funding source that will be around for the next 10 years. I believe communities have an opportunity to look at what they're funding for their community development block grant projects and programs, layer on the Build Back Better opportunities. So if they're thinking about infrastructure programs that, again, help to reduce air quality or improve air quality within their communities, and then thinking about layering on some of these spot grant opportunities so that they can really be successful in securing some of the funding that is competitive. So there will be funds that are just generally appropriated by formula, but then again, Justice 40 is competitive. So 40% of the IRA will be made available for very specific activities that highly impact underserved or historically disadvantaged communities and communities of color.
And as you talk about the competitive funding, I heard you formula funding exactly, which means basically based upon your population, I guess the characteristics of your population, your community may get X dollars. Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned the competitive funding. Does that mean that the local government organizations will have to apply for those dollars?
Yes. So local governments will need to apply, but then there will also be some consumer products that small businesses can apply for or individual property owners can apply for. What we're seeing with Forward Platform is that there are now local governments that are starting to really think comprehensively about how they will really mobilize around the IRA, and they're creating platforms in some way that could be powered by Forward to really bring all of their strategic objectives in one platform, secure funding through competitive means, through grant writing and other just program design strategies, and then also the alignment of stakeholders. So generally, from my experience in government administration, successful grant applications really are comprised of a variety of very strong stakeholders. So having the element of being able to pull stakeholders around a specific issue to be competitive throughout these opportunities is also very important. And the last element is thinking about how to augment staff capacity, which across the nation, regardless of budget, community size, there is a shortage in government administration staffing. And so while opportunities come up like the IRA or even Build Back Better, there is still a very real reality that governments are having a hard time administering existing programs. We saw this bottleneck relative to COVID-19 relief funding packages that communities were appropriated millions of dollars, and some still have not fully spent those funds from 2 years ago. And so it's not that there is a need gap, there is a administration gap. And so being able to utilize technology is really going to be an essential element of being not only sustainable, but also being successful in these competitive opportunities.
Okay. Okay. All right. And you hit on something that is really, really significant. As I talk to people who are in local government, be it elected officials, be it city and county managers, be it HR professionals, every organization seems to be short-staffed these days. And when during the pandemic, the conversation was, well, people just don't want to work anymore. But as you dig deeper into that, you find instances where somebody who had COVID now has long COVID symptoms, and they just aren't as functional as they used to be. So they've had to drop out of the workforce. I see instances where people who are eligible for retirement and used to say, hey, I'll work another 4 or 5 years, they just decide, no, I'm out of here
Yes.
because I don't want to risk the exposure, and things are just a lot different, a lot more stressful now. So they decide to go ahead and retire. And then, of course, the more morbid piece of that is there just aren't as many people to work anymore because we had so many people who passed away because of the virus. So you combine all of those factors, and it seems like local governments really are strained in terms of being able to do their basic work, more or less any quote unquote extras, like going out to secure grant funds. So is that something that your firm provides as well? Do they actually do it for governments if
Yeah.
necessary?
Yeah. So
Okay.
with Forward platform, and to your exact point, Ms. Jackson, there is a drain on local governments and just government as a whole because of all the reasons that you just mentioned. And so the last element too that I'd just like to add is just this natural attrition. There are, people that just naturally retire, but there's government is such a specific, unique niche industry that the processes and workflows and policies that are applicable to the government sector are not standard to any other industry. And so there are specialists needed to actually like move and program these funds and get them out to where they're supposed to go. So with Forward Platform, one of the reasons why I decided to come on board is like I've been in the shoes of government where we've had high need, but we have such low capacity that it's just so hard to meet the gap. And so it's really exciting to be able to provide government with the tools that I wish I had. And so program administration from front to end is something that a Forward Platform specializes in. So Forward will take any source of government funding, design a program, market the program, also administer funding directly to the residents or small businesses. And then they also do a very intricate data dashboard so that government can understand in real time like where their taxpayer funding is being spent and which populations are being impacted by that investment. And then there's also the compliance piece. So Forward also handles all of the reporting requirements and also responds to audits in partnership with our partner agencies. And so taking all of the front to end program administration and being able to augment staff capacity is what Forward provides to the marketplace. We work with cities large and small, from state governments, New York and Washington. We've administered programs for the city of Long Beach and the county of Los Angeles, which is one of the largest counties in the nation, all the way to smaller cities. We're working in Gwinnett County in Georgia, which is in the, obviously greater Atlanta proper. So we work across the nation throughout US cities, and we're able to administer any type of program. But the key element that I really want to just highlight is that there are so many different programs. The standard enterprise programs, there could be 30 programs that cities routinely have to administer that have 30 different statutory regulations and maybe 30 different service populations. And then there's also these new programs or spot programs like IRA and Build Back Better. So there is an ever-growing complexity essential to actually administering government program opportunities. And so we also recognize that, and we also write grants for our partners. We've written several grants in the last quarter that are also federal and foundation. So we think about how do we get more money into the communities that need it, and then how do we help our partners administer those funds effectively. And so we're able to help at both ends of the pipeline.
Okay. And so that really does help put all of this in context for the local governments, that, yeah, the federal government's made some programs available. And yes, there are some resources out there that can help you apply for the competitive funding and put your programs together on behalf of your residents.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking from the resident side, if I'm the average citizen or the citizen who is concerned about government and concerned about my community, why should I be interested in Build Back Better and the Inflation Reduction Act? Sort of what's in it for me as the average citizen.
So what's in it for the average citizen from IRA and Build Back Better? Better infrastructure. There are definitely programs in every community that have some funding appropriated, but there's some funding gaps. And so IRA and Build Back Better, they have the opportunity to help fill those funding gaps. They have the opportunity to help transform the built environment with various investments that improve the way that we live, planting trees and installing bike paths and affordable housing near transit, and creating additional jobs that ultimately drive up incomes within our communities, and also expand the amount of money that's available to reinvest in small businesses. And so to really fuel this cycle of health and sustainability. So this is just a huge opportunity to think about like what's needed in the community, and then look at these funding sources as opportunities to leverage the success of those planned programs. And so on the consumer side, like directly to household, there could be incentive programs for new appliances. We've seen funding relative to transforming heating devices within communities. There could be additional enhancements in broadband infrastructure, so free Wi-Fi or other elements that really just make life easier and better. So really, I encourage the local constituent to reach out to your local community and just ask what's the strategy to take advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act? What are you all doing to position our community to take advantage of this like once in a lifetime hallmark package? Like every community should have a plan about how they're going to go after their fair share and help further impact within their communities for the people that they serve.
Okay. And at the end of the day, I think what I'm hearing is there's potential for a healthier community, a healthier environment, a cleaner water supply, because we know that many of these communities have struggled with that. A couple of weeks ago, I had an episode with somebody who actually lived in Flint, Michigan. And she talked up close and personal about the challenges of living in community, to educate children who had been affected by a water supply that definitely was not clean. And that hit home, I think, for me about how just the connection between us, particularly as people of color, But everybody, it affects everybody. But we know these things are more likely to happen in communities of color, or low wealth communities, etc. Um, just connecting the dots with, you know, environmental justice. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that too. But you connecting the dots, water supply, pollution, um, uh, emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, just all those things. It seems like our communities generally, and specifically among low wealth communities and people of color, we just don't know enough about those topics.
Mhm. Agreed, Ms. Jackson. And I think the last element that you just highlighted, we don't know enough about those topics, but the key to debunking or closing that knowledge gap is with information and data. And we're living in 2023. We've seen so many advances with AI and other just data providers that every community, if they plan on investing tax resources in an equitable manner, there should be a way to gather and demonstrate data so that in underserved communities, regardless of, and this is like an economic development misnomer, but there are, even to communities that have like lower income average, they still generally, and the data suggests that there still is a higher proportion of individual people that live within these areas. So there may be a lower average income, but the per capita income rivals the more affluent areas. And so what happens from the administration lens is there's this general thought of we must, protect and continue to upgrade and enhance the more affluent areas. But the reality is that these tax dollars are being driven from underserved, lower income communities. So there should be an equity lens applied to how funds are reinvested in infrastructure, which also relates to the environmental justice component. So what happened in Flint, Michigan? Environmental injustice. What we've seen happen to communities across the nation, environmental injustice, when infrastructure breaks down, that ultimately has a very tangible health impact and also an environmental impact, which also secondarily impacts the economy. So then this is like this self-fulfilling cycle of degradation. So data is the only way to democratize the distribution of resources, and technology should be the standard in 2023 and beyond of how communities across the nation are not only administering taxpayer dollars, but doing so in a transparent manner. And then also really identifying that their investment decisions are designed to build equity. If they are not, then we're continuing the structural degradation of our communities. And so there is real opportunity to reverse this, but in order to do that, we need to be strategic in demanding data, demanding that resources are invested in an equitable manner, and making sure that this process is transparent. So communities should be using some form of a technology platform to prove that what they are doing is fair, just, and equitable.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. I think you may have just given me the title for this episode when you said data is the way to democratize the use of resources.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what Forward Platform uniquely is positioned to do for communities across.
Okay. Because, and I'll be honest, going back again, been around local government game for a long time. The squeaky wheels got the resources.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And this changes the paradigm, the presence of data, which means you've got to be gathering data, it's got to be well organized, and it's got to be reported back in a way that people understand. But in gathering that data, that helps mute the squeaky wheel to a degree and really allocate resources in the way that would be most equitable. Okay.
Yes, this information is available. It's ready to available across the nation. There's so many different inputs now that literally neighborhood specific data exists about how people are spending their money, how much money is available, how much tax dollars are being appropriated from that community. This information exists, but they need tools to aggregate that.
Excellent. We've had a great conversation about some of the resources federal government's made available, and also about the connections between energy, greenhouse gas emissions, the need for clean water, infrastructure, and how that impacts communities of color and lower wealth communities. Is there anything else that you want to share with our Local Matters family before we wrap up our interview today?
No, just I encourage everyone to just get involved, get engaged, just even a simple, call to your administrators or to your elected officials and just asking the question, like, what are we doing to prepare for IRA, for Build Back Better, could really get the ball rolling in a good direction.
All right, very good. We appreciate the time that you spent in public service, as well as how you are now accomplishing some of the same things, creating positive change and making communities better. So thank you so much for being a part of the Local Matters family.
Thank you for having me, Ms. Jackson.